2020, an unforgettable year that will be recorded into the annals of history as one that saw unexpected and dramatic changes imposed on the entire world. This as the COVID-19 pandemic spread its tentacles across almost every country on the globe, Trinidad and Tobago not being spared. The pandemic was no doubt the biggest story of this leap year. Also making headlines in 2020, the DSS, Drug Susu, general elections held amidst the pandemic, and Patriotic Energy's bid to purchase the Point-to-Pair refinery. The impact of COVID-19 on Carnival, the introduction of new currency, and crime were also among the issues at the top of the news. We look back too at the generosity of a nation towards the less fortunate hit by the pandemic. Join us now as we rewind 2020.
We are outside of the Couva Hospital and Multi-Training Facility, a building which in its short lifespan has run the gamut of polarizing public perception, from wasted white elephant to pinnacle of the parallel healthcare system. A fitting a place as any to begin the discussion on the life lesson that has been 2020, class of COVID-19. For more on this, we go to Crystal Wilson.
The year is 2020. The year the world stood still and looked on as an invisible virus took the lives of loved ones one by one, separated people and tore lives apart. The year the world stood still and looked on almost helplessly at the mayhem created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Death tolls amounted to hundreds and even thousands in many countries daily. Loved ones infected with the virus were left to die all alone, their deaths reported without a name, without a face, their lives ending as just another COVID-19 statistic. Embracing new habits now deemed the new normal, which we would come to depend on to save our lives. Even though rumblings of COVID-19 continued in the distance, Trinidad and Tobago still managed to host Carnival celebrations in February 2020. But the freedom which came with the jubilation was not meant to linger. The coronavirus had plans of its own. Citizens and government officials grew concerned with developments trending globally. Naturally, panic mode set in. Members of the public were seen hysterically buying food, medication, household and personal sanitizing items in bulk at wholesale stores across the country, readying themselves for the unseen. The items that flew off the shelves first: hand sanitizer and toilet paper. Worldwide, COVID-19 deaths continued to increase quickly and steadily. And on March 12th, the inevitable was confirmed. Trinidad and Tobago recorded its very first COVID-19 positive case, a 52-year-old man who returned from traveling to Switzerland.
It's a 52-year-old male who flew into the country from Switzerland on Monday, the 9th of March, that is this Monday. It is worthwhile to know that since Monday, this person has been in self-isolation.
As this country's COVID-19 figures continued to climb, government stepped in, grabbed the bull by its horns, and made the bold step to protect citizens, starting first with the nation's children. The announcement came during a sitting of the House of Representatives.
Given our stated objectives, the government of Trinidad and Tobago will advise that from tomorrow, all schools and universities and other places of learning will remain closed for 1 week in the first instance in order to slow the potential spread of any infection that might be with us at this time.
The Ministry of Health, led by Health Minister Terence Dialsing, wasted no time in making moves to protect from the spread of COVID-19. Parallel health systems were set up across the country and included facilities at Balandra, Sangre Grande, the Cora Hospital and the Couva Hospital and Multi-Training Facility. COVID-19 also saw the emergence of new faces. The ones that would usually work behind the scenes were brought front and center as the population demanded action, answers and comfort. The Ministry of Health set up press conferences to provide regular and timely updates as things progressed. Citizens warmed to what would soon become familiar faces. Head of Thoracic at Cora Hospital, Dr. Michelle Trotman, epidemiologist Dr. Avery Hines, and the Ministry of Health's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Roshan Parasram, represented the hundreds of unseen frontline workers and set out to educate the public on COVID-19 as fast as things developed. Dr. Parasram has been leading the medical team, advising government on implementing measures aimed at containing and reducing the spread of the virus. On March 16th, government announced plans to repatriate a group of nationals stranded on a cruise ship in the waters of Guadeloupe. It was confirmed one passenger on board was COVID-19 positive. A day later, the passengers arrived and under heavy military escort were whisked away from the runway at the Piarco International Airport to a facility in Balandra. It was there they were put into groups and tested twice daily. When positive samples were confirmed, the severely ill were transferred to the Couva Hospital and Multi-Training Facility, while the mild cases were taken to the Cora Hospital. Days later, and with no slowing of COVID-19 cases locally, government stepped up its action, taking control with an attempt to incubate the country.
At midnight, we will no longer be allowing people into our borders, whether you are non-national, which already exist, or a national of Trinidad and Tobago.
2 days later, this country's first COVID death was recorded, a 77-year-old male. His death announcement set the trend for how future COVID-19 related deaths would be reported by the Ministry of Health. Moving forward, and in the interest of the victim and family privacy, no name, no face, only listed a number and having died of the coronavirus. The announcement of the death came not from the Ministry of Health, but from UNC political leader Kamla Persad-Bissessar via a Facebook post, taking the nation by surprise, a move strongly criticized and deemed irresponsible by health officials as it was made public before doctors had a chance to inform family members of the deceased.
Of the family, the Ministry of Health delayed the public release of the information so that the family would have ample time to process it. The minister requested that a humanistic approach be given and respect for the confidentiality of the patient's information be given. They asked that the family be allowed to mourn in peace.
Soon after, on March 27th, government stepped up its plan to protect Trinidad and Tobago by suspending all non-essential business activity.
At the end of the day, it is going to be the police, with the assistance and support of the defense force, who are going to be policing this, who are going to be ensuring that we abide by this. Everybody who is out there come midnight on Sunday, please walk with your identification.
With most places closed and citizens indoors, Port of Spain and other parts of Trinidad and Tobago were reflective. No people in sight, no cars, no traffic, and hundreds of businesses remained with shut doors. As the days passed, government, on the advice of the Ministry of Health, announced a schedule of operations for essential businesses, most of them allowed to open between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. On April 5th, over in the sister isle Tobago, health officials on the island reported its first COVID-19 death. The person, an elderly male with pre-existing medical conditions. But this time, and with thousands of Trinidad and Tobago nationals stranded abroad, government began its repatriation process, with nationals who wished to return home having to apply for permission to do so as borders remained closed.
Travel exempt, one word, TRAVEL, exemption, travel exemption, TRAVELEXEMPTION at MNS, Ministry of National Security.gov.tt.
Government said it was prepared to cushion not all, but at least part of the ripple effects arising from closed businesses and minimal economic activity. Relief came in the form of salary grants and mortgage deferrals. Constituency offices distributed food and produce hampers, and households with children who would usually have benefited from the school feeding program were given food cards.
we will provide income support for a period not exceeding 3 months under the public assistance grant. And where there are children under 18 years, these children would be considered necessitous, and the grant may be extended for a further period, but not exceeding 3 months. We are in the process of establishing a policy for an initial period of 3 months, but no more than 6 months for households where a wage earner was retrenched, terminated, or there has become a reduced salary.
Restaurants and bars were among affected businesses, bar owners the most vocal, complaining of losing money and on the verge of deeming their businesses closed for good. Government gave in and, on the advice of health officials, allowed bars to operate, but on the condition that they adhere to COVID-19 safety guidelines. Social distancing was to be maintained, hand washing and sanitizing stations to be set up for use by patrons, and mask wearing maintained. Their reopening on June 22nd, however, landed them in some troubled waters. Open for barely a week, health officials reported a spike in COVID-19 infections.
Doors are closed. We know that some bars are closing their doors and are still encouraging patrons to be inside. We know that is going on.
According to the Ministry of Health, based on contact tracing, bars were referred to as super spreader areas, but bar owners and operators said they were not to blame.
The persons who disregarded the guidelines in the first place, well, I mean, it was a restaurant that kind of spearheaded that whole thing, and they made all the attention, and they operated very freely, right up until the 10 o'clock marker.
While the nation's school population waited for months to hear of government's plans for academic year 2020-2021, finally came word. Virtual learning would continue for the rest of the year, but special consideration was given to primary school students preparing for SEA 2020, now shifted from April 2nd to August 20th. Then Minister of Education Anthony Garcia said it was necessary for children and teachers preparing for the exam to have face-to-face interaction. It was short-lived, however. Schools were closed after only 1 week, a number of children having fallen ill, all confirmed as infected with COVID-19. It was back to virtual learning until the August 20th exam, and when that day eventually rolled around, sighs of relief came from parents, educators, and of course the students themselves. The exam was finally over. Meanwhile, government continued its management of the pandemic. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley on July 3rd rang the election bell, signaling the start of a 6-week campaign season. Health officials advised that virtual campaign meetings be held in accordance with COVID-19 public health guidelines. And after weeks of online meetings, social distancing went out the door on nomination day as supporters of major political parties converged in different parts of the country in support of their candidates of choice. Post-nomination day, another spike in COVID-19 cases was confirmed by the Ministry of Health. However, health professionals did not attribute the spike to the absence of mask wearing and social distancing on nomination day. And on the heels of the swearing-in ceremony of the new cabinet and Dr. Keith Rowley as Prime Minister for a second term in office, legislation was passed making mask wearing mandatory while in public spaces and workplaces.
Under Section 105, the regulation will specify you shall wear your mask. It shall cover your nose, your mouth, your chin. There shall be that mask wearing in public. By way of example, there'll be exceptions in the regulations. Children under 5 years old, people with physical or underlying medical conditions, etc., where the construct is designed so that they're in a specialized place that it doesn't need to operate with mask wearing.
Throughout all of this country's COVID-19 battles, one face stood out to the entire population. From border closure to advising that schools across the country be closed, from the setup of a parallel health system to reductions in the number of people allowed to gather, from mask wearing to regular hand washing for citizens, Dr. Parasram has played a significant role in all of these major decisions. Some pretty large shoes to fill, so we asked the doctor himself, what goes into making decisions such as those mentioned previously, decisions that ultimately affect the health, safety and well-being of an entire country.
Public health being as broad as it is, we cover a lot of areas. What has brought COVID-19 has brought to life, of course, is what we do for infectious disease, protecting the port health of our country, protecting the hospital care, hospital level care as well. But
we asked the CMO which developments have so far impacted him and his team.
They informed me that they were going to swab this guy who had come back from Switzerland at the time. So my medical officers called and they said it looks like COVID-19. We tested him and it turned out to be positive. We had a press conference later that day to let the population know we had our first case. We defined it to some extent. The school closure came out of his children being present at one school in particular, which we closed right away. And then shortly thereafter, we closed a lot of the schools because there was a university connection as well.
And what is it that we on the outside are unable to appreciate about the life of a frontline worker?
I would say February, March, April, thereabouts, maybe into May, we weren't thinking about personal stress levels. We were trying to put things in place that would deal with the virus, at least from the ministry's perspective, to try to build hospital capacity. When we had our first case, we had 4 beds for treatment of COVID-19 cases at Cora in a specific isolation room. We had to rapidly build capacity to have more cases be seen in hospital, as the policy was to bring everybody into hospital to treat in the first instance. So we were consumed, I think, almost as like soldiers being in a war. We were consumed with the battle against the virus, planning. Most of us got by with 3 to 4 hours of sleep for months on end, for healthcare workers, for other frontline staff of national security as well. So I think it was more about planning and processing, and we let ourselves go to some extent and just continue to work continuously.
As the world continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ministry of Health says it remains committed to protecting the population. Reporting for TTT News, I am Crystal Wilson.
The road to owning the Point-to-Pierre Refinery has been an up-and-down battle for Patriotic Energies and Technologies Company in 2020. Though still not yet out of the race, Patriotic was dealt a serious blow in October when government announced that the company did not meet all the requirements to seal the deal. But there was a glimmer of hope. Sunil Lala looks back at the negotiations which took place this year between government and Patriotic in a bid to give life to the refinery.
Cabinet today agreed to select Patriotic Energies and Technologies Company.
On September 20th, 2019, government announced that Patriotic Energies won the bid to purchase the former Petrotrin refinery, beating out over 50 other bidders. It was an early 2019 Christmas present to the company, which is a fully owned subsidiary of the OWTU. But it wasn't a smooth road for Patriotic to finalize the deal this year. On January 15th, Patriotic and its international advisors met with an evaluation committee and a cabinet subcommittee with 3 ministers to discuss the restart of the refinery. But as with everything, COVID-19 pushed back the negotiations somewhat. In May 2020, OWTU President General Ansel Roger said when Patriotic completed the acquisition process, there would have been a major overhaul of the refinery, which could take a year for the refinery to be fully opened. But things began to heat up in the lead up to the August 10th general election. One of the first comments regarding the refinery came from UNC's chairman, Dr. David Lee, on July 12th, which angered the OWTU. Mr. Lee assured residents during a walkabout in Point-to-Pierre that the party intended to reopen the refinery if it were to be elected into government and disregard Patriotic's deal.
Reopen the refinery. With or without the OWTU, we are going to reopen the refinery and bring back the life and blood of Trinidad and Tobago, and especially Point-to-Pierre community and the constituency of Point-to-Pierre, to be able to give them hope and ensure that there will be employment again with a crown jewel like our refinery.
During a walkabout in the same area that weekend, MHD political leader David Abdullah claimed that government was stalling on completing the negotiations for the refinery arrangement with the OWTU. But just a few days later, on July 15th, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley announced that government was fast-tracking the process to close the refinery deal before the election.
It is the intention of the government of Trinidad and Tobago in the coming days to sign off with the OWTU on the beginning of the way back for the Petrotrin refinery, known today as Guaracaria, as soon as the OWTU is ready to commit itself to what I've said here in this statement today and provide its commitment refinery.
Less than a week after this announcement, Energy Minister Franklin Khan, via an update, said that government was yet to sign off on the sale of the refinery, but assured that they were working on doing so. In response to this, Urupach East MP Dr. Rudal Munilal at a political meeting on July 29th accused the government of hastily giving away the refinery.
I am told that Keith Rowley has gone secretly in a clandestine and surreptitious manner to sign a deal to give away the refinery because the people who take in the refinery.
This comment, however, was rubbished by the OWTU, saying it fell in line with the UNC's campaign of lies, misinformation and deceit, and mentioned that discussions were ongoing with government. And mere days before the August 10th general election, the OWTU accused the government of using the sale of the refinery as part of an election ploy. OWTU President Ansel Roger, meanwhile, called on the government to complete the sale and agreement of the refinery, despite assurances and appeals from Energy Minister Franklin Khan for patience.
You don't do people that. You don't take advantage of the suffering and the pain and the agony of people on the ground just to fool them, promise them this, that and the other, and can't deliver.
And in an almost immediate response on the night of August 5th, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, speaking at a meeting in Tunapuna, said government would not rush to sign the sale and purchase agreement with Patriotic Energies before the general election if it was not in the best interests of the people of the country.
We have issues with the refinery still, but the refinery is out of the equation now. And if someone wants to put it back into business, we are going to assist with that, but we are not committed at any cost. It has to be that it makes sense. And it has to be that it must always be in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's where we are at. And we gave our commitments. And we're not going to do it because it's election. We're not doing that for election.
And with the elections done and dusted, MSJ leader David Abdullah sent out a media release urging government to end the process of negotiations, saying there was no good reason for it to be delayed any further. But almost a month after, government set a deadline for the end of negotiations with Patriotic.
We expect to get specific responses in a specific time, and if by the end of October there is no conclusion to the way forward, and by conclusion I mean contractual conclusion between the state and Patriotic, then we will have to look at other options.
And just days before October 31st, Patriotic indicated that it met the deadline to submit a proposal for the sale of the refinery after meeting a week prior with a ministerial committee to resolve a unique challenge. But on October 31st, Energy Minister Franklin Khan announced that the deal had been severed since Patriotic's final proposal did not address the issues that could have led to a contractual agreement.
Meetings have been going on for over a year, and we had back and forth. We had come down to the wire. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance had set a deadline, and all parties were working diligently to meet that deadline. Unfortunately, it has not been met.
This prompted OWTU President Ansel Roger to respond by saying they were surprised by the announcement and urged government to reconsider.
What we thought would have been an announcement to say that we would have met the requirement was the opposite.
The Prime Minister, though, appointed a committee to evaluate the request for proposals for the use of the Pointe-a-Pierre refinery to examine the latest position of the negotiating parties. And as expected, the UNC weighed in on the issue with opposition leader Kamla Prasad-Bissessar accusing government of using the refinery sale as an election gimmick.
Days before the election, days before, they're going to sell it, they're selling it. We had no problem for locals to own the refinery. When they made this statement, we had no problems with that. We said, okay, but there are questions of transparency and accountability.
A week later, on November 11th, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley accused Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar of putting the sale of the Guaracara refinery in jeopardy. It came after the opposition leader allegedly found details of the ongoing negotiations and non-disclosure agreements in her mailbox, which she subsequently shared with the public. Dr. Rowley criticized her for allegations made against Patriotic's pending partnership with Trafigura Incorporated.
So you hear the name mentioned, Trafigura, and all kind of conspiracy theories being drummed up by the opposition leader about Trafigura. Trafigura is not the government's partner. Trafigura comes with the patriotic offer because the OWTU, in wanting to get involved in refining, they went and looked for their partner.
The Prime Minister also assured that government's intention to sell the refinery was no secret and there was no alternative buyer.
Worldwide job losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic led to many people looking for ways to make quick money just to survive. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, the alternative presented itself in the form of the Drug Susu, or DSS. It was the brainchild of Defence Force Lance Corporal Karen Clark. Mr. Clark, a licensed moneylender, set up the DSS scheme and it garnered much public attention. So much so that it got the attention of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, resulting in millions of dollars being seized.
It was the largest money bust for the year 2020. On a quiet Tuesday on September 22nd came the news of a police raid in La Joquita, where $22 million in cash was seized. Later that same evening, reports surfaced that the same cash which had been seized was returned to the DSS founder. This resulted in an uproar, prompting quick response from the Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, National Security Minister Stuart Young, and Police Commissioner Gary Griffith. But before we get into the events that followed. A Susu is a West African financial system which our African ancestors used to accumulate wealth, to purchase land, and build homes once slavery ended. In this model, the main commodity is monetary and involves a growing number of participants. Weighing in on the issue, Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith said the DSS was founded on greed and scampish behaviors.
A business does not work by you just feeling like I put 10,000 and I get 60,000. It shows greed, it shows stupidity that persons in a country believe that if I get 10,000, I put 10,000 and I get 60,000, the police is stopping me from doing that. The police is preventing that from 5 other families now having to suffer because of your greed.
In a similar breath, the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago all issued warnings to the public against entering into pyramid schemes like the DSS. Securities and Exchange Commission's Manager of Corporate Communication and Education, Ellen Lewis, said there were several things to consider before getting involved in a savings scheme.
If it sounds too good to be true, it very much likely is too good to be true. In other words, it is fake, it is false, it is a scam. Somebody comes to you with an offer, ask certain questions. Is it registered? Where are your financials? Who owns and operates and runs the company? I want documentation as to who you are. If the person representing this so-called investment is unable to provide you with the answers you're looking for, it is a scam.
Ms. Lois cautioned the desire for a quick turnover of cash could lead to financial disaster.
The risk is real. You lose your contribution, your hard-earned money. And the other problem is that the person who offered this so-called deal of a lifetime can face possible charges once investigated by the police service because of what is happening now in society where persons because of COVID, they're uncertain about person's job and their job security, and they're taking more risk that they would not likely take in a normal situation. There's a risk that is not worth taking. Do not take the risk. Your money, you worked hard for it, see it well invested.
But there were others who believed differently. One member of the DSS, speaking under anonymity, said its process was transparent, legitimate, and geared towards providing financial stability.
What we do, we gift. We do not invest, but we gift $3,500. You put on a flower as a fire. That $3,500 goes towards someone who is in the water. There are 4 positions: fire, air, earth, and water. The idea behind it is that the $3,500 by 8 fires goes towards the person in the water who receives $28,000. At that point in time, what should happen from week to week? Everyone on the floor should fall into a new position.
He saw the scheme as a means of ending people's dependency on financial institutions.
The benefits are an opportunity to create generational wealth. 2, an opportunity to be debt-free, an opportunity to start your own business or to further your own education, and an opportunity to stop depending on the next salary.
As the DSS investigation progressed, Police Commissioner Gary Griffith suspended 4 police officers, including 2 senior officers, for returning the $22 million in cash. In addition, he transferred 4 police officers out of the Northern Division while transferring 7 SRPs into the Northern Division Area West. On October 16th, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley lent his voice to the situation.
I am disturbed. And because I was disturbed, and I am disturbed, and because of what it means, pointing to and fingering unacceptable levels of corruption in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, immediately I approached the British government, with whom we have a memorandum of understanding dated 2018 to cooperate on matters of national security. I approached the British government for help. And we are awaiting British police officers in Trinidad and Tobago on that matter of the Drug Susu.
Additionally, he sought the assistance of the Barbados government to establish a committee to also probe the DSS, saying the DSS was a threat to national security. Concerns about the national security implications of the seizure, the subsequent release of the cash and associated matters surrounding the scheme, prompted a decision by National Security Minister Stuart Young to seek international expert assistance. Minister Young requested assistance from the National Crime Agency in Great Britain, the NCA, and from the Barbados government for investigators from the Royal Police Force to join the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in the investigation. And the uproar went to another level, with a second raid on the DSS headquarters to seize receipts and records. Then, DSS ordinary investors stepped forward to protest, insisting that at least a portion of the fund belonged to them.
Right now! Right now! Right now! Right now!
Investor Group representative Rhonda Jones told TTT News they needed government to help in getting back their monies.
The DSS is an open susu. If you look at I'm going to proudly show it to you, if you read it. So it states what I do, right? Lovely. So therefore, don't just put us in one basket or use a broad brush and paint everyone and say it's only bad boys. Do I look like a bad girl? No, I'm not. I am a teacher.
The latest in the continuing saga of DSS was that on December 2nd, an Arima magistrate dismissed an application filed by Mr. Clark to return the $656,200 in Drug Susu money seized from his La Joquita home on August 25th. Police had also seized monies from Mr. Clark on 2 other occasions. $707,500 on September 2nd and $6.4 million on October 27th, 2020. On December 7th came news that hundreds of people, among them some who had already lost money in previous schemes, reported losing $3,500 and more in yet another pyramid scheme. this time allegedly run by serving police officers.
August 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, Trinidad and Tobago went to the polls. The new normal created by the COVID-19 pandemic meant that political parties could hold no massive rallies, nor could there be any hugging or kissing of babies and young children while on the campaign trail. But the two main political parties, the People's National Movement and the United National Congress, found other means of reaching their supporters, getting into their homes via live streams on television, radio, Facebook and YouTube. Karen Cozier-Phillip takes a look back at the short and spirited election campaign and the declaration of official results, which this year took a little longer than normal.
July 3rd, the election bell rang. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley announcing August 10th as the date Trinidad and Tobago would go to the polls to elect a new government, giving political parties just 5 weeks to campaign. With Trinidad and Tobago in the throes of a global pandemic and public health guidelines in place to limit public gatherings and practice social distancing, virtual political rallies became the norm in 2020. The election contenders turned to social media sites like Facebook and Instagram, along with YouTube, to present their candidates and launch their manifestos. The People's National Movement called on voters to make the right choice, campaigning on the success of the fight against COVID-19, rebuilding the economy, infrastructure and development, and anti-corruption.
Officer, we indicated early that we are going to go after white-collar criminal conduct in this country. What was the result? Fire. Just so. Just so. In the kitchen in Wasan. In the woodpile in Wasan. Fire in the records office in Wasan. And when the fire service went and put it out, the fire blazed up again, same place. 2 fires they had in Wasan. Burning the records, burning the paper. Once we go digital, you don't have that access. Don't have it. Because data can be stored well away from where the activity is taking place.
The United National Congress shared their party's plans to get the country working again. They promised the creation of 50,000 jobs, the restart of the sugar industry, and the establishment of a special fund to finance mega projects.
Idle cash balances mean cash which is parked up in the bank accounts and earning no returns.
2020 was a year when a number of political parties and candidates presented themselves as choices. According to the Elections and Boundaries Commission, 150 candidates from 19 political parties filed nomination papers. The People's National Movement was the only party to have 41 candidates. The UNC had 39 candidates with no representation in Tobago. Smaller parties like the MSJ, the PEP and the NNV fielded a number of candidates.
Former People's Partnership Minister of Community Development Winston Gypsy Peters made his political allegiance official when he was selected as the PNM's pick for the Moruga Tableland constituency. Former FIFA Vice President Jack Warner also shot back into the limelight after he re-entered the political fray to contest the seat of Lopino Bonaire West for the ILP.
I shall walk and touch every household, every hand. I shall meet everybody who is able to vote. I shall convince all communities. I shall use such levels of technology that has been unseen and unheard of before. And the list goes on and on and on. And I shall give you a campaign that is unbelievable.
July 17th, nomination day. Big music trucks and tassa drumming accompanied many candidates, while others simply walked with a handful of supporters to file their papers. Hours before nomination day, UNC political leader Kamla Persad-Bissessar found herself in some hot water over a slip of the tongue.
I know that some people are concerned, and in fact the black man on the other side talked about kindergarten. What a great disservice and disrespect to the young people of this country.
Mrs. Prasad Bisessa denied she referred to Dr. Rowley as a black man. Dr. Rowley wasn't surprised by the statement.
Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisessa has been leading a quiet racial campaign for a very long time, and then she came out openly. There are very many occasions when you in the media would have seen her accusing me of being in the pockets of the 1%. That was an attack on the Syrian community, and then trying to divide us along racial and ethnic lines. And then you would have seen her when that didn't work, she went one step further. She called me an Oreo.
Preliminary results of the August 10th general election put the PNM in control with 22 seats to the UNC's 19. The PNM lost the Muruga Tableland constituency. Preliminary results also gave the PNM the popular vote, with a total of 322,250 votes to the UNC's 309,188 votes. The PNM's political leader promised to do his best to lead TNT out of the difficult and trying economic times.
It will be over. We'll wake up tomorrow morning and these elections will be behind us. Let us go back to being one people under God, working together to build this blessed nation of Trinidad and Tobago. In this period more than any other, let us put aside personal slights. Let us put aside personal wants and look at the national needs, especially of those persons who are least able to look after themselves. The priority of this government is to ensure that all those who call Trinidad and Tobago home, that they live here with respect and in dignity, and the people and the government.
But the end wasn't near yet. The UNC called for recounts in 5 marginals: St. Joseph, Toko Sangre Grande, La Hoqueta Talparo, Tunapuna and San Fernando West. Watson Duke's Progressive Democratic Patriots also asked for a recount in Tobago East, but Mr. Duke conceded defeat even before the recount was completed. The 5 recounts in Trinidad would drag on for more than a week as the defeated UNC candidates scrutinized every ballot.
The initials varied from ballot paper to ballot paper within the same polling division. You had unsigned ballot paper, no authorizing initials on the ballot paper. You had numerous stamp-related issues, and I was told in the recount, even the EBC felt that there was some issue to be raised there, where it appears that ballots stamped for the PNM all had consistently the same irregularity.
Much to the amusement of the PNM.
I don't know whose signature that is. I don't like how that X looking. In Sandy Grande, the person the UNC sent was so ridiculous. The person said, the X must be dead center between the two. There's not all I know, you're laughing. There's nothing to laugh for. It's thing to cry.
It would take 9 days after the August 10th general election for UNC leader Kamala Prasad Bisessa to finally concede defeat. She accepted full responsibility for the party's loss and was disappointed with the results. On August 19th, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley was sworn in for a second consecutive term. His cabinet and his Senate bench were a mix of familiar and fresh faces.
The opposition benches in the parliament also took on a different composition, with losing candidates Jolene John and David Naked being appointed to the Senate, along with embattled former People's Partnership Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs, Anil Roberts. In November, the government failed to get support from the opposition for the anti-gang bill. The government sought to extend the legislation, which expired on November 30th, for another 30 months. The vote was 24, 0 against and 19 abstentions.
Unfortunately, the group that I lead, the government, we did not have the votes to continue that law. There are other people in the parliament who believe that the law is not necessary. We disagree very strongly, and that is the outcome.
1 month later, however, the government was successful in its bid to pass the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Bill 2020. The opposition voted against the bill, but it needed only a simple majority. On December 6, the UNC political leader faced her party's membership at the internal elections with her star team, her challenger, former government minister Vasant Bharat, and his team Lotus. After the ballots were counted, Kamla Prasad Bisesa was given the mandate to continue leading her party. Across in Tobago, campaigning is in full swing by the two main political parties. The PNM is seeking to retain its majority in the Tobago House of Assembly, while the Progressive Democratic Patriots will attempt to increase its minority of 2 seats. The THA was dissolved on November 17th, and the election is set for January 25th, 2021. And news came in December that by-elections will be held in 5 municipal corporations, also on January 25th, 2021. This follows the election of several councillors as members of Parliament to the House of Representatives. The by-elections will be held in Shogunas, Diego Martin, Arima, Point Fortin and Princestown. I am Karen Koze-Phillip, and this is TTT 2020.
At the beginning of February, there was talk of a new virus called COVID-19. Soon the virus turned into a pandemic, and even in December, Trinidad and Tobago is still grappling with its effects. 2020 saw an announcement that Carnival 2021, often dubbed the greatest show on earth, is cancelled. In addition to rising COVID-19 numbers and the increasing death toll, the domestic violence rate increased. Still, there was one thing COVID could not stop: the easy flow of new currency, the polymer bills, into the economy, which hit banks in November. In this segment, Kimberly D'Souza takes a look at how COVID-19 has affected Carnival, crime, and currency.
When last you take a jump on the big stage or trip across the savannah grass? Well, I hope you enjoyed it, because according to Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, there will be no carnival for 2021. It seems the stage really gone bad.
COVID-19 is here, and with it comes the removal of a few of our top cultural events, the biggest being Carnival. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, speaking in September's Spotlight on the Budget Forum, said unless a strong wind blows and COVID-19 is a thing of the past, Carnival 2021 is cancelled. However, he did acknowledge the decision would have a serious financial impact on the country's economy.
A carnival, which is the perfect environment for the spreading of the virus, is not something that we can countenance at this time. This decision, I know, would have serious economic knock-on effects, things that we would lose in terms of the economy. But by the same token, we can't hope to gain on that swing and die on the merry-go-round.
PM Rowley said then his top priority for the new year is getting students back to school, and many will return for face-to-face interaction on January 17, 2021. Since the cancellation of Carnival, though, there have been calls for alternatives to staging the festival, with some stakeholders even suggesting the event be held virtually. Some have argued the cultural spectacular is not just about beads and feathers, and that other aspects such as pan, mocha jumbies, even chutney can be showcased in a different incarnation. However, Chairman of the National Carnival Commission, Winston Gypsy Peters, said the Commission plans to showcase archival footage of Carnival's past as a form of advertisement for Carnival 2022.
And we have all the archival work. We have archival work dating back 25 years or more. And what we are going to do is put all these things together and highlight it and showcase it to the world, so that the world can see where Carnival come from, give them an antecedential view of what the whole Carnival thing is about and why Trinidad is the mecca of Carnival, and show it to them coming down to this day.
If there is, indeed, no Carnival 2021, it would be the third time in this country's history the locally dubbed Greatest Show on Earth has been cancelled. During World War II, the festival was postponed and again in 1972 because of the polio outbreak. COVID-19 has made its way into the homes of many families, in more ways than one. Domestic violence cases increased during the pandemic, and many are calling for mental support for not just the victims, but for the perpetrators as well, describing domestic violence as a cyclical occurrence. According to the Domestic Violence Act, domestic violence is defined as physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or financial abuse committed by a person against a spouse, child, any member of the household, or a dependent. The United Nations hosted a virtual dialogue as part of its Spotlight initiative to eliminate violence against women and girls, and the resident coordinator shared an interesting finding.
Globally, 1 in 3 women and girls will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. COVID-19 has exacerbated gender-based violence with data from around the world, including right here in Trinidad and Tobago, indicating alarming spikes in reports of domestic violence. To solve this pressing problem, we need to engage all of society, including men and boys, who are both victims and perpetrators of violence.
According to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the number of domestic violence murders surpassed last year's figure of 20 in October. The TT Business Chamber, weighing in on the issue, said it has always recognized domestic violence as a workplace issue, even if incidents occur elsewhere. At a virtual dialogue in December, Interim Chief Executive Officer of the Employees Consultative Association, Stephanie Finkel, said it is an employer's job to keep employees safe at work. She called for a national workplace policy to be implemented in the workplace to eliminate violence and sexual harassment at work. The National Trade Union Center agreed. General Secretary Michael Anisette suggested NATOC and the ECA work together to develop training that will inform senior managers about workplace violence. While conversations continue, women and those who are witnesses to domestic violence are urged to report such incidents to the Gender-Based Violence Unit. Manager of the Gender-Based Violence Unit, Shireen Pollard, said all individuals need to change their response to these types of gender-based violence and domestic violence acts.
If we speak to anyone, any random person, there is almost always someone who can say, yeah, he does really beat to a man, or he's a raper man, or he like little girls. It's become so normalized in our society for us to know who these individuals are and do very little to address it.
Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith has encouraged those who have been victims of gender-based violence to report the crimes. As such, on Tuesday, January 21st, the Gender-Based Violence Unit was launched to deal with such acts. While there is no law to govern gender-based violence in TNT, there is the Domestic Violence Act, Chapter 4556, which is intended to provide relief to victims of domestic violence.
Let me take you back to December 2019, when there was a rush on all the banks, all the credit unions, all the financial institutions, even here at Central Bank, all for this guy, the new polymer $100 bill. Yet in November, the central bank launched the $5, the $10, and the $20 polymer notes, and yet there was no lines, no fuss, and no rush. But why?
According to the central bank's head of operations, Sharon Villafana, the current cut note will remain legal tender until the end of 2021, when a decision will be made to demonetize the notes by December 2021. Governor Dr. Alvin Hilaire predicted the public would respond well to the introduction of the new notes.
I think that Trinidadians and Tobagonians are very sharp and very attuned to things, and the transition will be very easy. We are able to adapt very, very quickly to a lot of things. I remember when we were doing the demonetization, and people thought it might have taken a long time. People moved and they got with it.
The central bank governor also announced the bank will introduce new polymer bills for the $50 and $1 notes in January 2021. In making the switch to the new design, the central bank said the new polymer notes were introduced for its improved durability, security features, and increased accessibility to the visually impaired. Amidst all its benefits, it's hard to deny the bill's appealing and lightweight design. Carnival, crime, and currency. The 3 C's that were either impacted by or continued in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic. Kimberly D'Souza, TTT News.
Well, the year 2020 was also seen as a year of kindness. Good Samaritans and organizations did their part to assist families who were hardest hit by the coronavirus pandemic. Children without devices were gifted laptops or tablets to participate in their online classes. And when there was a shortage of hand sanitizer in the country, 2 major companies stepped in to fill the demand. Mahalia Joseph Wharton reminds us of some of those instances of generosity.
One of the major changes associated with the virus was the mandatory wearing of face masks. Many were unable to purchase their own. Groups from every end of the country ensured that those without would not be left out. Proprietor David Mohammed distributed hundreds of masks in the Canupia area. He said the initiative was necessary because many people were unable to purchase food, far less a proper cloth mask. The government also issued a tender for manufacturers of cloth masks for free distribution to provide free masks to the public. While some distributed masks, others distributed food items to ease the burden of those severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The NGO for the Love of Reading partnered with MTA Pharmacy in Canupia to help those in need. Ara Cleghorn realized many persons were still without food due to either job loss, reduced pay, or poverty. So Ara and her mom came together and launched a free food bank. It allows persons in need to simply access food items for free. In March, when schools were closed, the COVID-19 pandemic presented new challenges for teachers and students with the switch to online learning. There were some parents of children at the preschool, primary and secondary level who were unable to purchase devices for their children to continue with their studies. The government, organizations and individuals distributed laptops and tablets to ensure that the children who needed it were given a device. In October, 30 students of the Beetham Government Primary School were able to access their schoolwork online thanks to the East Port of Spain Development Company. The company responded to the call by the Education Ministry to adopt a school. The giving didn't stop there. Angostura Holdings Limited, in conjunction with Memory Bank Computers Limited, donated computers to some of the schools in Port of Spain as part of the Ministry of Education's Adopt a School program. The National Gas Company also pledged $2 million in devices to students from both primary and secondary schools. It joined the list of over 40 corporate sponsors who supported the Ministry of Education's Adopt a School initiative. On the government's end, Education Minister Dr. Nian Gadsby-Dolly and Minister in the Ministry of Education Lisa Morris-Julian presented devices to early childhood care and education centers and special schools in September. 70 laptops were made available to ECCE teachers, while 98 laptops were given to public special schools specifically for children with special educational needs. In March, one of the leading rum producers in the Caribbean, Angostura Holdings, decided to alter one of its production lines to produce a sanitizing agent. They manufactured hand sanitizers after supplies of the product dwindled during the COVID-19 outbreak. They distributed an initial offering of 25,000 bottles of the product free of charge to bridge the shortfall in supply to hospitals, the protective services, and other essential services. In April, business conglomerate Ansa provided thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer to members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service through the I Support Our service. Other frontline workers also benefited from the offering. The hand sanitizer was made by Carib Brewery, one of Ansa companies.
That was Rewind 2020, a look back at the major stories making headlines this year. On behalf of all of us here at TTT Limited, thank you for being with us throughout this year. We wish you a happy, productive, and safe 2021.